So I'm calling out to our greatest rival, our South African friends. Could you do me a favor and
it's just also
expose this coaching unit? Welcome to the Rugby Ramble podcast, hosted by Zach from Hakatime Rugby and Rich from the Rugby Analyst. Enjoy the show. Hello, everyone, and welcome back. This is episode 2 of the Rugby Ramble. As always, joined by Rich from the Rugby Analyst.
How you doing?
Hello, Rich. Doing well.
Episode
Doing very
2,
well,
yeah.
actually.
Yeah, I can see you're in the library there in Venice or something. You've been reading up.
Does it look like a Venetian library, does it?
Well, it kind of does, apart from the 6th volume of the encyclopedia is written by Sonny Bill Williams, which I didn't know.
Well, as you know, he's a man of many talents, Rich. So, not surprised to see him in amongst Italian dignitaries in the back here.
Yeah, well, for those listening on Spotify or the other podcast platforms, there is a picture behind on the YouTube channel coming up. You will see that.
Yes. Yeah. No, so as you alluded to, I am currently in Italy, obviously on holiday at the moment. And I think you recently completed a holiday as well, Rich. So
yeah,
looks like it's all play and no work at the moment for you and I.
That's the one. Back to work now, though. How's your Italian?
Exactly.
Decent?
Buongiorno. That's about it. That's all we've got.
Great start. It's
a work in progress. Okay, so we'll touch on the topics, obviously, that we're going to cover. And we've got so much to talk about. Obviously, we had the mid-year tours. There's a number of interesting talking points. There's the lead up to the Rugby World Cup and the implications of recent results to the Rugby World Cup. So 3 major topics that we're going to cover off today. We're going to talk about the World Cup draw because there is a lot that's been made on how it's been constructed, the implications right now. And I think there's a couple of really important talking points for those top 4 teams. Because as we know, get to the quarterfinals and there's a real potential that those top 4 teams, we're not going to see them in the, or at least 2 of them in the semifinals. So we'll just touch on whether or not we think they've got it right, what they can do to improve, and the overall implications so that everyone's really aware. We'll touch on the outcome of the North versus South recent mid-year tours and just go through some of those key talking points, what it actually means right now. As well as just look at the red cards, because that seems to be the hot topic right now, the 20-minute red card rule. We've got recent examples of red cards, and we just want to take a pulse check on, do we really have it right now in terms of rugby product and what we're trying to get from the game? So those are the 3 major topics. I think let's kick things off with, your thoughts on the recent mid-year tours, Rich. I think we can probably touch on some of those talking points and just discuss
okay.
it.
Yeah, so much to talk about. First episode was before everything kicked off. Now we've got a stack of evidence. We go into the Rugby Championship and it's all building nicely, isn't it? So go on then, rather than go through every team, who caught your eye, Zach? Who do you want to talk about?
Well, you can't go past Ireland, obviously. There's a lot being made about, obviously, the result in New Zealand. But I actually think the biggest talking point in terms of Ireland is the way they played, right? It's just that they just look like the most well-drilled team in rugby right now. Everyone knows where they're supposed to be. Phase after phase of continual variety in attack. Just threats at the breakdown, set-piece dominance. It's close to a complete performance, I think, as we've seen from, and I hate to sort of wax on about it, but it is as close to a complete performance that I've seen from a team in a long time.
Yeah, no, I think you're right to go on about it. I've been banging on about it on the Rugby Analyst videos for ages now. I mean, if you want evidence of great coaching, Ireland got it in spades, haven't they? They're just so well drilled. We know it definitely helps most of the players being Leinster, but still you've got to do it on the international stage. And as Andy Farrell says, they play differently. They're not the same team structure-wise. So yeah, those last 2 tests were just mind-blowing in their cohesion, shall we say, in every area. So good.
Yeah.
I mean, no doubt they took advantage of, some sloppy stuff from New Zealand, but you still got to execute.
Yeah, that's right. You still have to win. And what was interesting about that series is it's a real contrast to the other side in the performance of the All Blacks, unfortunately, right, as an All Black supporter, in that you've got a really well-drilled, well-coached team, which looks like they've all bought into the system. They'll play for their coach. They all know where to be. And then on the other side, the All Blacks unfortunately just look like they're lacking direction. We don't normally see handling errors like we did in that series as well from the All Blacks. So there looks to be either communication breakdown, lack of coaching, lack of confidence. It was just a real contrast, I thought, between those two teams.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. It's the contrast. It's completely the opposite. Ireland's biggest strength was New Zealand's biggest weakness, but they have acted. I'd love to know your thoughts on this, being a Kiwi and obviously a New Zealand fan. They've dumped their two coaches, Plumtree and Moore. Pretty big call. They've kept their head coach. They've got a new highly rated forwards coach who I'm pretty sure you're happy with. Is that right? Yeah.
I'm happy with it from two angles, which I'll touch on, but obviously he's a crusader. So let's just say Razor was to enter the picture. He's already starting to put in place a few components that would serve him well. So there's probably a little bit of strategy there from New Zealand Rugby in appointing Jason Ryan, particularly. But yeah, it's just fascinating the way that New Zealand Rugby is operating right now, in that from management through to coaching, it just seems like a real mess, for lack of a better word. A lot of inconsistency in decisions that are being made, promises of transparency and accountability, and all of this talk and rhetoric. But at the end of the day, the results are showing that there is something wrong. And all Kiwis know it, right?
Yeah.
So this is the biggest issue, is that Kiwis are being fed this narrative, but anyone that's paying attention will know that there is a serious problem in this team. And that third game showed it. That first half, it's all sort of kick first, compete poorly for the high ball, I should say, which is not New Zealand style. We go back to our traditional style and get a bit more sort of purchase, I guess, in some of the attack and play. But everyone knows there's something going wrong here.
Well, I remember you saying, nice controversial statement from you, Zach. It wouldn't be the worst. Did you even say this on camera? We can always cut it if you don't like it. It wouldn't be the worst thing if New Zealand actually lost that series.
Yeah.
Do you stick by that? Because I mean, they're resetting now.
100%.
Okay.
100%. They tend to take quite a cautious approach. So the New Zealand Rugby Union, obviously the coaches of the assistant coaches of the scapegoats right now. But we all know that the head of that unit driving the direction, most Kiwis will look at it and say, ultimately, he's at fault. So I'll add to the controversial statement, Rich, and I'll say it wouldn't be the worst thing if we lost the series. Well, if we lost two games in South Africa.
I was just going to ask, if you lose both those games against South Africa and one of the games against Australia, is that then it for Foster?
Mark Robinson, CEO of New Zealand Rugby Union, in a recent interview came out and said Ian Foster has been retained for the South Africa tour.
I saw that.
Right? That's a bold statement, and I think that means Foster has two games. So I'm calling out to our greatest rival, our South African friends. Could you do me a favor and
it's just also
expose this coaching unit?
Well, it's just all so muddled, isn't it? Because I mean, Jason Ryan's come in, who's could be really good, but wasn't he lined up maybe to come in with Razor at some point? I don't know.
Yes.
And then Foster's gone. Foster's kind of moved sideways, which is weird. Taking what position did he play?
Foster was a hooker.
Yeah, and he's taking charge of the backs temporarily, which is a bit weird. Smith, who played in the backs, right? Is that right? Yeah. So he's taking charge of, he's heading up some sort of overall strategy, which is Foster's job. So it's just really, maybe it'll work. I don't know, but it just seems really strange to me. But we're going to have to see a new Zealand, because with a new coach, new forwards coach, he's going to want to do his stuff, isn't he?
Yeah. Last thing I'll say on this, we'll move on because we're probably spending a bit too much time on the All Blacks. But it looks like a muddled mess. It smells like a muddled mess. So, but they have two games in South Africa to, in fairness to Ian Foster, this is really his last roll of the dice. So let's see what happens.
Well, it's exciting. If anything, it's exciting, Zach. That's why we're talking about it.
That's right. Okay, go on. Who else caught your eye?
Who caught what? Okay, tell you what. Wales, the more I've been thinking about it and linking into this World Cup draw we're going to talk about, Wales could well be a dark horse building up to this World Cup. Because their ability, I mean, they've always done well in the World Cup. Sure, I know they haven't won or anything, but they always go far. And what they showed in South Africa, once again, is they're very hard to beat. You don't tend to stretch away from them that easily. And they're not overawed by extreme power. Maybe a super slick team like Ireland, maybe they're a tiny bit more vulnerable. I don't know. It's just a thought. I'm not saying Wales, put your money on Wales for the World Cup. I'm just saying with the draw, which we'll talk about, and with that performance, they could do quite well. Who knows?
Yeah, interesting. What did you think of their Six Nations performance, though? Because they haven't been going well. So do you see that there are improvements? Are they going in the right direction? Or is this just a case that, I mean, they have traditionally been a great rival for South Africa in particular in the way they play? I think I saw a stat that the last 6 games, the difference in those games against South Africa, 4 points on average. So they look like they've got a style that really competes well with South Africa in particular.
Literally just about to say that. Styles make fights. That's what they say in boxing, isn't it? I think Ireland, New Zealand matched up. Well, Ireland certainly matched up quite well to New Zealand. The style helped them in a way. And Wales do well against South Africa's direct style. So, there is that to be said for sure. But I think in that last game as well, what again just caught my eye is Wales finally moved the ball. Really well. They got outside the edges of a really good South African defence. And they've been trying to do that under Pivac for a long time. And it's the first time I really saw it work against high quality sides. So, I'm not saying yet Wales are an unbelievable side. I'm just saying they're very hard to beat. They do well in World Cups. I like the draw. And I think they're fairly well, equipped to deal with tough games.
Good point. I think after our discussion about the draw, you're probably right. I think we'll come away with Wales actually have a really favourable draw and a style that can disrupt. So, you're probably right there.
Yeah, it's just throwing it out there. Is there anyone else you want to talk about from the nations before we move on?
Probably the only other thing I think from a Springboks perspective, there's been a bit made about their underperformance, as some see it against Wales. But as we touched on, I mean, Wales traditionally a great matchup for them. A great matchup against them, I should say. And I just feel like when Wales won that game, there's enough asterisks or question marks to those performances. You've got Youngchies who ran the ship in game 1, kept it close, obviously. You've got a developing squad who played in game 2 and lost. And then you've got, a lot of the big boys came back and proved a point somewhat in game 3. So I actually think a lot of the criticism there are a little bit unfair. I actually don't think there's a huge amount we can take from that series from a Springboks perspective, other than they did what they needed to do to win that series.
Yeah, I think you kind of always got to put that series to bed, don't you? In that third test, they started to get their game together finally. And it will have stung them. I mean, going close against Wales at home will have stung them. And I think we'll see absolutely fully blooded South Africa at home against New Zealand. I think they're going to be definitely a step up in intensity. Can they match that in quality? Maybe, but their team play should be more slick. They're going to be better than they were against Wales. I'm pretty sure of that.
We're almost through most of the teams after saying that we wouldn't do it, but let's just touch quickly on England. And one question I want to ask you is more tailored towards Eddie Jones himself. Had a go at someone calling him a traitor, so obviously struck a nerve. He's come out in the media and said he'd love to coach a NRL squad.
Yep.
What do you make of all of that?
I think you make of it what you make of most of Eddie Jones's statements. I mean, you can listen to it all, you can ignore it all. I don't think it makes a huge amount of difference. Just, I'd say, see what happens on the pitch and just judge it from there, really. When I was in that press conference for my first live game against the Barbarians, I deliberately asked both my questions not to Eddie Jones. I asked them to Tom Curry, it was, because I thought he would give me an answer and there'd probably be, something I could read into his answers, or it'd be, not truthful. That's not the right word, but do you know what I mean? I thought it might be a bit of a waste of a question asking Eddie Jones something, to be honest.
No, I know what you mean. He has a way of deflecting.
Yeah, and that's fine. And
that's back on.
Yeah, and that's part of a coach's job. I'm not saying he shouldn't do it. I'm just saying, maybe we shouldn't listen too much.
Yep, fair enough. Okay, Rich, next topic I wanted to touch on was the World Cup draw. So I might just spend a few minutes just touching on how they draw the pools, how they ultimately result in who is playing who. And then we'll touch on some of the implications of that draw and what it actually means for the Rugby World Cup itself. So just to touch on how they draw the pools themselves. The first thing they do is they sort out teams into a set of 5 bands, is how they term them. And they're 5 bands of 4 teams. Now, those bands are based on the rankings as at 1st of January 2020. Okay. And remember, the Rugby World Cup was held in November. The final is November 2019. Okay. So, really, what they're saying is the banding is favoring teams that have performed well in the previous Rugby World Cup. So, maybe that's right, maybe that's wrong. But the implications then is that they draw the pools basically once they've got the teams into those 5 bands. They then draw which team from each band is represented in each pool. And that's held in December of 2020. So essentially, you've got the World Cup draw figured out 1 year after the previous World Cup. Make sense with me? So then the next implications, obviously, is that basically as an outcome of that, we have in Pool A and Pool B. In Pool A, we have New Zealand and France, Italy, Uruguay, Namibia. And in Pool B, we have South Africa, Ireland, Scotland, Romania, and we may have had another qualifier there, but another qualifier. Tonga have made it through, yeah. Now, when we get to the quarterfinals, the winner of Pool A plays the runner-up in Pool B. The runner-up in Pool A plays the winner of Pool B. Okay, so literally now we have a situation where our top 4 ranked teams right now, in order, Ireland, France, South Africa, New Zealand, will play each other in the quarterfinals of a Rugby World Cup. Okay. And I think you can debate, are they clearly the top 4 teams? Maybe, maybe not. Definitely 3 of them are in that conversation.
I think I'd go with top 4 at the moment.
Yeah, top 4 at the moment. That's right. But we have a situation where 2 of those teams miss out on the semi-finals. On the other side of the pool, as you mentioned earlier in our topic, obviously Wales and England, Australia feature on that other side of the draw. And you could probably argue there's a more favorable run in for those teams. Potentially, if you're looking from a rankings perspective, then you would have to say that is the case. Right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind saying as an England fan, C and D is the right side of the pool. It is far easier than A and B. With no disrespect to the teams in C and D, it is just the side to be on.
Yeah. And I want to put this from, a different point of view, because I think a lot of people will be looking at recent results and saying Ireland and France, 2 best teams in the world on recent results. And you might even say, if you're an Irish fan, if we faced New Zealand in the quarterfinals, you might like your chances. But let me play a scenario back to everyone. What if Ireland loses to New Zealand and dips out at the quarterfinal? And what if France loses to South Africa in the quarterfinal? So we make a lot of this North versus South debate, but that could be a real situation in a Northern Hemisphere-based World Cup where the order is completely disrupted. And I know a lot of fans would be really upset with that. So thinking about it from that perspective, do you think they have the process right? Do you think this is throwing up way too, difficult implications that we should not be seeing? Or do you think, let's just see what happens, it makes it more exciting?
There's so many different takes on this, aren't there? I mean, if I was a team like, say, Ireland or Scotland, I think I would be pretty gutted because they've had a couple of stinky draws, to be honest, and this is another one. It's a bit of a hard cycle to get out of because you're drawing the World Cup very soon after the previous World Cup. So if you did well in that World Cup, the odds of you doing well in the next World Cup are a little bit more. So you might well get drawn again in a favourable position. And, it's quite hard to break. I mean, Wales, they were in top of their pool because they did so well in that World Cup. And
that's right.
You've got to say fair play. But then, like I said, because it's so soon after the World Cup, you don't really give time for any new world order to establish.
Yep.
Could they postpone it a bit? I think so. They obviously want to get everything sorted logistically, tickets, travel, all that sort of stuff. But I'm pretty sure they could delay it a bit just to see what changes after the World Cup a bit more. But if France, again, home World Cup in France, if France go out early, I know it's not a rugby thing, but you lose a lot of money, you lose interest. Not as good a World Cup if they go out in the quarterfinals.
Yeah, that's right. I think, and in fairness, no team should have any favourable draw, really. It should purely be the luck of the draw or earned, I guess. And they've kind of structured this that, okay, it's prioritising results from the previous Rugby World Cup. So I get that, but back to your point about establishing a new world order, we have seen teams move on quite significantly, right? So France, Ireland, good examples. And unfortunately, New Zealand, given Ian Foster after the last World Cup. So it's meant that the order has reshuffled. So
although I will cut in there, it could reshuffle again before the World Cup. So, at the moment, it looks like the top 4 sides are on the left-hand side of the draw. But let's say Australia have a storming year and they're in that top 3. So, you can argue it both ways. But
yeah, and I suppose any scenario you really put up, you can just end up with a really sort of difficult draw. Someone has to face. I mean, at the end of the day, to win a World Cup, you have to face the best teams, right? So
at some point, this is one I mentioned before. It's like if you draw, let's say France are the best team in the world, and you draw them in the quarterfinals, whoever faces them will come out with the line. You got to face the best to win the World Cup, and you're like, well, yes, but you'd like that to be in the final, honestly. Otherwise, you're just lying. But I tell you, whoever draws France will say you got to beat the best to win the World Cup, and it's rubbish. You want to face, well, in fact, no, you don't. I'll go even further. You don't have to face the best to win the World Cup. You could have a favourable draw. So let's say you have an easy-ish quarterfinal. Someone knocks out a favourite in the other quarterfinal, so you play a slightly easier semi-final, and again, one of the favourites creates, there's an upset in the other semi-final, and you play someone who's not the best in the world. So you could go through a whole World Cup and actually not play the best team in the world. I'm being facetious, but it's factually, it's one of those things that just winds me up a little bit.
Yeah, no, I get it. I'm just sort of thinking back from previous World Cup champions, and there's no team there that I would think would celebrate an easy draw. Sort of looking back on them and just thinking they were all kind of well-established teams who went on to win a World Cup based on that mindset of we're here to win. So I don't know. I don't know if I fully buy into that idea of an easy draw.
I'm being difficult here, but I'm just saying, that anything could happen, really. You probably will face someone very, very good, but you could win a World Cup and not play, say, France or Ireland.
Yeah. I'm expecting, though, that if New Zealand and South Africa go through from there is going to be significant backlash, I would say. I just wanted to use that example because I think you can kind of look at it from one angle and say, well, these teams have had the better of the results recently. But if it flips around, as you say, which it could, then it becomes a real difficult talking point because there's revenue on the line. There's, the sort of boredom of going back to the old order, which I know a lot of people are not sort of happy with. But let's see. I mean, it creates some interesting talking points.
Absolutely. I mean, just imagine a New Zealand-Ireland quarterfinal rematch of the tour. Just imagine that. And a France-South Africa, the two most powerful sides in the world, just beating each other up. I mean, when you say styles make matches, will we see those two matchups?
Yeah. No, I think if you're Wales, Australia, England, you're looking at this quietly saying, quite happy with that side of the draw.
Yeah, you're saying, right, you guys go and smash the actual living daylights out of each other, and then we'll pick up the pieces of whoever's left.
Yeah. Anything else you want to touch on regards the World Cup draw?
No, I mean, you look at the other side, C and D, again, not being disrespectful to sides, but there is the possibility for an easier quarterfinal here. Whoever wins, let's say Wales or Australia win Pool C, for argument's sake, they would be happy playing, say, a Japan or an Argentina. I'm not saying that's easy, but compared to the other quarterfinals, Pool C's got quite a lot of that. You want to be top of Pool C. That's all I'm saying. So if Australia, say, go top of Pool C, I think they're in a great position, same with Wales.
Okay, last topic here, Rich. The Rugby Championship, obviously the SANZAAR countries have adopted the 20-minute red card rule. It hasn't been fully adopted by World Rugby, so we know in the mid-year tours, not adopted, and we're going to get an interesting contrast from the Rugby Championship, where it is adopted. Just to quickly explain the 20-minute red card rule, the ruling is that a player who infringes, sort of does a red cardable offence, that player will be rested for 20 minutes. He will not be able to return to the team, but the team will be able to replace that player with a reserve, obviously from the bench. The implications here being, or at least the thinking being, that games aren't ruined by 14 versus 15 man contest, particularly if it's an early exit with a red card. Now, we did see 2 red cards in the mid-year tours, so I do want to go through those in a bit more detail because the implications here, I guess the questions I want to ask you are, do you think it should be adopted by World Rugby, and should it be included in the Rugby World Cup? And we'll obviously use a couple of these examples just to kind of work through the implications one way versus another. So let's talk about the head contact example first, which, just to recap, Angus Tava red carded for what is a high shot head-on-head contact during I think it was game 2 of the Ireland-New Zealand series. Similar incident, Andrew Porter in game 3, only given a yellow card. And I know a lot of Kiwis blew up on this, but I'll just run through the assessment process that's used here. So World Rugby, or at least the refs, will ask 4 questions when they're assessing this. And the first question, has head contact occurred, yes or no? Second question, was there any foul play? And foul play in this instance is described as not just intent to harm, but also poor technique introducing harm to the player, right? Or lazy technique in putting a player in a situation where they are potentially harmed. What was the degree of danger, high versus low? And is there any mitigation, right? Mitigating factors. First question, red card, yellow card. Did they get it correct in your view?
In my view, well, I'm going to steal what you said to me as well, because I agree with it. Yeah, I think according to their process, yes, it was correct. Was it, unlucky, harsh? Yeah, I mean, it could have easily been another red card, but Porter happened to be going backwards. It's like he could easily have been going forwards if, let's say the New Zealand ball carrier had just, had to take a little half step catching the ball or something, so it's really fine margins. But yeah, it is correct. But what's really interesting, Zach, is it does seem to be a bit of a north-south thing as well here. Tell me what you think here. I think the Southern Hemisphere sides are very keen to get this 20-minute red card rule on. And, the World Rugby, which many say is a bit controlled by the Northern Hemisphere sides, is more reticent. I mean, where do you sit on that fence? I'm sitting on the fence very painfully because I cannot make my mind up.
I sit on the fence of what type of product do we want to see. What is the end result that we want to see here in our game of rugby, right? And is the red card rule in the spirit of the game? So I've always known a red card as, so I'll try to be empirical about this, right? Have we seen an increase of red cards? The answer is yes, but there is also an increase in player safety, obviously, and more knowledge in player safety. So we do get the importance of it. But we've actually moved to a situation where we are treating a poor technique as a red cardable offence versus what used to be real intent to harm as a red cardable offence. So I sort of step back and just look at it. Is this what we want from our game, right? Is this what is going to attract the most players? Is this what also, and it sounds like I'm sort of giving the answer already, but think of it if you're a mum, right? With kids coming through the ranks. Is this what you want from your kids playing rugby? Mums might look at it and say no, which means we have a player number issue. Spectators might look at it and say yes, which means we have a potentially revenue hit issue. So you're probably right to sit on the fence. My personal view, though, I lean towards I want to see open free rugby. That's sort of my bar when it comes to assessing these types of things. And therefore, I lean towards the 20-minute red card rule.
Yeah, I'll tell you why I'm on the fence then. I mean, I think everyone wants to see 15 versus 15. I think that's pretty universal, isn't it? But I think what the problem, trying to get into World Rugby's heads here, I think the problem they've got is they're desperate to reduce head contact. Obviously, we've got it's a hot topic. We've got lots of links now starting to be, shown possibly between CTE, chronic head trauma, and things like the terrible things like dementia and that sort of thing. And they know they've got to do something about this. And they've brought in these tougher laws, safer head contact, and it hasn't worked. And I'm really surprised. I thought these harsher or more frequent red cards would mean coaches would say to players, change your tackle technique. Because I've made this point a few times before, Zach. Top players or even players in any decent side, if a coach says to them, do this, they're so good and they know that they don't play unless they do what the coach says. They will do it. Like 95% of the time, they will do it. But players aren't doing it, which leads me to conclude they are not being told enough. You can't go high, or stand up in the tackle. I think players are choosing to stand up in the tackle in all sides still, and I think that's World Rugby's problem. Is they're thinking, well, hang on, if we take it down to 20 minutes, with basically saying we give up, this isn't working. Just see the problem there.
I do see the problem. The only sort of rebuttal I will give to that is that the infringing player is penalised, right? And I guess we're trying to work out what is the appropriate penalty of poor technique, or I suppose you could even frame it, you're still potentially injuring players when there is a real focus on CTE and other medical issues. But do we want to ruin contests over this? And this is the great debate, right? It's really a blurred line between player safety and the product of rugby that we're trying to protect. And I think it might sound simplistic, me just sort of saying I'm for the 20-minute red card rule, but I just really believe that sitting down a player who has been negligent and maybe even dealing with it post-game to punish them further might be the right
post-game
answer.
citing. That's not a bad shout.
Yeah,
I honestly think they're in a pickle here, World Rugby. I think they thought it was going to have much more effect than it did. And they say, okay, we're going to have a year or so of a bit of a shambles where we have loads of red cards, and then it's going to level off back to the level it was. And it's just not.
Yep.
I mean, something I've put forward in some of my videos before is, again, 3 cards is you have your normal yellow card, and then you have your orange card, which is the 20-minute rule for technical red card, if you like. And then your flagrant red card, someone just deliberately booting someone's head on the floor, something like that. That's the one I'd chuck out there, maybe with sightings as well.
Yep. And you kind of contrast it with the Darcy Swain incident, which we haven't touched on yet. But if anyone looks at that headbutt and says that is, going to seriously injure someone, then I think you've got a case there to say, well, maybe the 20-minute red card is actually favorable. Because that, all of the medical issues and everything else goes out the window when you look at that incident and you just say, well, it was stupid. It was a hothead moment, but was the player really in danger from a little press of heads, right? So I describe it. Probably not.
Yeah, no, it's the message, isn't it? That's what they're trying to say. They're trying to say, even though this was pretty pathetic, we cannot allow it. So yeah, that would be I think a 20-minute red card, orange card, whatever, would work very well in that situation.
So it sounds like you're moving a little bit more towards a Southern Hemisphere mindset here, Rich. Sounds like we've almost won you over, right?
Well, here's the thing. If you go 20-minute red card, and are we going to be reducing, cases of CTE? That's the thing. I think it would increase the product of rugby, definitely. Yep. But World Rugby know they have to do something to reduce head trauma. Yep. And if they're abandoning the red card experiment, they're going to have to try something else. That's the thing. They need something.
And I hope someone from World Rugby is watching this, because I think we've thrown up a great suggestion, right? Harsher sighting post-match.
Harsher sighting. That's a start. For me, 2 classes of red card and very harsh sighting where the player gets some nasty bans and the club gets. I really think you've got to sting the coaches into action here, where they're going, this is not worth it. We have to really tell our players to go out of your way not to go high.
Yeah. Sounds great. Okay. Well, I personally think we've cracked it, Rich. I think we've got a case to present here to World Rugby. Suggestions to improve the game. Sounds reasonable and logical to me. So I think that's probably such a hard topic.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I mean, it's going to run that one, especially when we get more and more evidence as well. But yeah, something's got to change, and it's a question of what.
Yeah. Well, we've covered the major topics here. 3 big talking points in the game of rugby. So we're going to leave it there for the second episode of the Rugby Ramble. I hope everyone enjoyed. You will see these available on Spotify, on Apple, also on our YouTube pages. We alternate between the Rugby Analyst page and my own, Haka Time Rugby. So look out for it on all major platforms. Please share and like us, and give us some feedback as well on topics you'd like us to cover, ways that we can improve the podcast, because I just really enjoy talking rugby, as you probably couldn't tell, and especially with you, Rich. So thanks again.
I've loved it once again. Episode 2 done. Look forward to episode 3.
Yeah, and let's put a bit of pressure on a South African to join us in the next one.
Yeah, he's coming.
All right. Thanks, Rich.
See ya.